Let's see. Okay, so we're going to start creating our augmented reality project. So if you're on the MEA 300 page and you go to Units, Augmented Reality, the thing that you need to get started is on this page. The link to the lecture that we went over on Tuesday, and I posted the video for that if you want to review that. And then we have a few steps that we have to go through to get set up to be able to add content to the project. And so it's a little bit more of a complicated sort of asset setup than what we had previously, but it shouldn't be too crazy. So the first thing that we want to do is fork the AR scene from my GitHub. So if you click on here, it'll take you to the page on GitHub. And you want to make sure to click the fork button here. I don't see it because it's my project, so I can't fork it. But you can click on that button. And when you do, it'll basically look like you have a copy of my project on your GitHub account. And it'll usually have like a little link here to what the original project looks like. So once you do that, you'll be able to download it onto your own computer. And you can just download it directly if you click on the code and click download zip. But if you do it that way, it won't be connected to your GitHub account anymore. So that may not really matter if you're using the same computer and you're not worried about losing your work. But if you're switching between different computers or you just want to have a backup and version control, it's better to click on the Open with GitHub desktop here. So again, you should do this once after you've forked. So you should fork first, click on fork, and then you'll see your own GitHub account here. And then you can go to code and click Open with GitHub desktop. This is going to say, do you want me to open this up? And you can say yes. And that's going to open this on your computer. I already have a copy of it on my computer, so it's already connected there. But if I didn't, so let me actually just move this and then show what it looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to remove that. So now it's gone. I still have my 3D game template, but I don't have my AR template anymore. Okay, so if I leave that and go back here, I'm going to do it again. And so now it's going to ask me where I want to put it. And so it's going to say clone a repository. So cloning is different than forking. Cloning is just making a copy of a repository. It doesn't matter if it's yours or somebody else's. You can clone any repository you want to. But when you clone your own repository, you can make changes to it. When you clone somebody else's repository, you can't. So you want to make sure that you're cloning your own copy of the project. So it shouldn't say Owen BMCC here. It should say whatever your GitHub name is there. And then you can just choose a folder where you want it to go. So it already kind of is guessing where I want to put this, but if it was wrong, I could go to choose and go to my desktop and find my project folder. And I can just choose the main folder that I want this to be in. So I'm going to click select folder and click clone. And so this is going to put it on my desktop. So if I go and open up my File Explorer and go to my desktop and open up my wrong one. Here's my class folder. Here's the AR scene template. And you can see this is just a basic Godot project. And what we're going to do in here is we're going to build the content that we're going to put into the AR project. So yeah, when you're cloning, if you get a message that says, "Are you contributing to the original or working on your own?" Choose working on your own project. So we're actually for the VR project, we're probably going to do something a little bit different, but for this one, you'll be able to do everything on your own once you get the template. So this is just a Godot project. So we're already pretty familiar at this point in the semester with Godot. If you go to the AR scene template and open up project.godot, this is pretty much the same thing as the game template. There's a little bit of a difference. There's no scripts in here. We're not going to be writing any scripts in Godot for this project. In the scenes folder, there's one scene called the export scene. And this is just an example scene that's set up so that this green cone will match the origin position of the marker in the AR setup. So, okay, so we'll come back here in a little bit to add a scene and to export some scenes. But basically, this is where you can build a scene, and then we're going to export it as a file to upload to the AR project. So I'm going to leave this open. We'll come back here in a little bit. Okay, so the next part is a little bit similar, but we're going to be using a different program. So the next part we got to do is go to Replit. You may have used Replit before. I'm going to log out real quick. If not, fine. Replit is a web-based IDE, and it's a really nice, robust platform for developing, mostly for the web, but also for other types of code. And one of the nice things about Replit is you can fork projects and publish projects directly from the interface. So if you don't have an account, you can click sign up, and you can log in and create a profile. But there's also options to use your GitHub account. So if you're already signed into GitHub, you could just click continue with GitHub, and it'll use that to authenticate you. I already have an account associated with my GitHub, so if I go to log in and click GitHub, it's just going to log me in. And so on Replit, I created a project for us to use. Let me find it real quick. Called the AR marker template. And this is going to work just like our Godot thing, except this is going to be published online. And so once you've created your Replit account, if you click on this link to the AR marker template, you're going to open up this project. And just like you did with the Godot project on GitHub, I'm going to open up a incognito window for a second. So when you open this up, if you're not signed in as me, you're not going to have the original version of this project, but there's a fork button here as well. So you can fork this and you'll create a copy of it on your own Replit account. So you'll be able to edit it and make changes and do whatever you want. So you can fork this project. Another nice thing about Replit is that you can invite collaborators. So you can add me as a user, and I can, make notes or write code or look at what you're working on. So Replit's a really good platform to be familiar with. So let's just look quickly at what's in this project. I'm just going to close these windows for a second. So this is a web-based project. So you may probably know a little bit about web development from MMP 100. There's an index.html page here. It's very simple. Basically, there's a pretty basic HTML template up here. I didn't even change the title here. I should call this a AR marker template. There's a video element, and this is to get a video feed from either a webcam or your phone's camera. And we'll see how that works in a second. And then there's just links to a bunch of different scripts that are going to set up our environment. So you don't really have to worry too much about this. The one thing that you are going to edit here is this script at the bottom. And we're not going to make a lot of edits to this, but I'll show you how it basically works. So that's the index.html. There's also a style.css page. It's very simple. It's just setting up how the canvas works. And then there's the script.js. And most of the code in here you don't really need to worry about, but I'll explain quickly what's going on. So basically, this section up here is initiating the AR environment. And so it's doing is it's getting your camera based on some default camera parameters. So this isn't the most sophisticated version of this because it's only going to use one type of default camera. But it'll work with any camera that you want. It's not going to be that camera, but it'll be good enough. And then in here, this on success parameter, the code in here is what's going to happen when your when the website gets access to the camera. It's going to set up an augmented reality scene, which is right here. And then you can add your models to the augmented reality scene. And so that's what we'll go over at the end is how to export from Godot and add your scenes here. You can see right now I have ar.loadModel scene /export scene.glb. You'll probably recognize that that export scene matches the export scene in my Godot project. And we'll go over how to add those. And then the number here is the marker that you want it to use. So we can look at the markers for just a second. I gave you guys 3 markers, and the markers I gave you are 0, 1, and 2. There's a link to all of the marker images right here. And this is from the AR toolkit. So the AR toolkit is an augmented reality. It's an open source augmented reality platform that was first released like a long time ago, I think in 2000 or 2001. And what we're using is a JavaScript implementation of this toolkit, which runs on the web. And the reason we're doing this is because when we're running something on the web, it means that we can access it very easily on any computer, on any phone. One of the challenges with augmented reality and virtual reality as well is that it doesn't always work on any platform. So developing AR, typically, if we were making like a very robust AR application, we would want to make it as an app for Android or for your phone. But there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. You have to have a registered developer account, which costs money. There's a lot of barriers when it comes to developing for specific platforms. So we can avoid that by making something for the web. So if you look at these images, you'll see all these different markers. The cool thing about these markers is that with an AR application, you have to be able to look at an image from all different sides. So none of these markers, all of these markers are completely unique, not just in terms of the pattern, but also in terms of the direction of the pattern. So for example, this marker is 0, and if I flipped it around, it would still be 0. So that's why we have to use these special markers that are trained, the program is trained to recognize these markers in a camera. So if you want other markers besides 0, 1, 2, you can go here and you can get anywhere from 0 to 63. That's the total number of patterns. And if you want me to print them out more, I can print out more markers as well. Okay, so that's really all you have to do here. But we can take a look at the rest of the code just for a minute. So basically, this statement essentially says that once we've loaded up the scene, we can or this basically says like once everything is set up, we can start the program. In here, this is our main AR scene. The scene has a scene and a camera, very similar to Godot. It has a renderer, which is basically what's drawing the graphics on the web page. And then this just refers to the width and height. There's an initialize function to set everything up, and then a start function that gets triggered once everything is ready to go. This is basically just setting up the canvas. This is looking at the orientation of the camera, whether it's portrait mode or landscape mode. And then this is adding a very simple light into the scene. If you want to add other lights into the scene, I can show you guys how to do that. this is loading the model. So this loads the models that we're going to create in Godot and assigns them to the marker. Although I'm realizing, no, that's right, marker number. Okay, never mind, that's fine. Okay, here, this starts the rendering, and then this stuff down here is just rendering your scene at about 60 frames per second. So it's a pretty simple scene, but it's relying on a lot of code that's inside this library folder. You can see there's a bunch of different scripts here that set up the basic components of the AR scene and the 3D render that it uses. Okay, so let's take a look at this. If I click run, we're going to see it run in this side window over here. If you click on open in a new tab, you can see it open on your computer or on a new tab. And you can also open this link. This is a live link, so you can open that on your phone if you want to test it on your phone. Once you're in the browser, if you right click, there's some options here to inspect to get your developer tools. And you can see when I reload this page, it's going to fit the camera view to the page. You can also toggle on the device emulator here if you want to see what it's going to look like on your phone. I can change this to like an iPhone, so you can see what it'll look like there. There's also a console over here. If you get any errors, you may see some red errors over here. And so if something's not working, you can check the console. Okay, so let's just take a look at this. So I'm going to take out, I think I actually mapped this to marker 1, which is this pattern here. And so there you can see once the pattern is in view of the camera, it's going to attach the scene that's exported from Godot onto that marker. So you can see where the green cone is. That gives you sort of a basic orientation of the directionality and the size of the scene. So you can look at what that looks like and then compare it to what the scene looks like in Godot. And so you can see the marker and the orientation and then the sort of dimensions of the scene. And that's pretty much the basic setup. So let's go over the pipeline for getting stuff into here. And so you can do multiple markers. So I'm going to go over exporting the scene that already exists, but then I'm going to make a new scene and export it, just adding multiple. So to go back to Godot, I'm going to go over the export process first. So Godot has this built-in exporter, so you can export a scene by itself, and rather than like a whole application. So if I have the scene open and I go to Project and Tools, we want to use Export GLTF. I click on that, it's going to open a new window. I'm going to create a folder called Export to put files in. And what we want to use here is a GLB file. So GLTF is the general standard that a lot of 3D programs are using these days. GLB is the same standard, but it stands for GLB for binary, is what the B means, and it means that all the data is packed into one file. GLTF is going to separate your different components, like your mesh and your material. And that's okay, you could work with that, and there's some advantages to that. But to simplify things, if we use a GLB file, that means we have one file that we have to upload into our project. So I'm just going to call this export scene1.glb because I've already done this before. And I'm going to click save here. And it's going to export. And so if I go to my export folder, you can see there's export scene1.glb. There's also a couple material files. I actually don't need these. They should be built in, so you can ignore those. I'm just going to worry about my GLB file. So that's it. That's the export process. Now we can import it into Replit. So I'm going to go back to my scene. And here's my scene folder. There's the scene I uploaded before. I'm going to click on the main files dropdown up here and click upload file. And then I'm going to find my project folder and choose export scene1.glb. And there it is. I'm going to drag it into this scene folder. And this isn't going to change anything, but I'll put export scene there. And then I'll do this again. I'll say load model. And so I just say scene slash export scene1.glb. And I'm going to attach this to marker 0. And so if I run this scene again, here's marker 0 to make sure the whole thing is visible. And so we see the same scene there on marker 0. And then here's marker 1. Got 2 of them. That's pretty exciting. So let's make one more scene. So I'm going to take my export scene. Actually, let's just make a scene from scratch. So I'll just click on the plus here, put a 3D scene. I'll call this new export scene. And with this version, when I make a mesh, I'm not going to use a collider because we're not going to have collisions in this scene because we're not actually using the Godot game engine as a game engine anymore. We're using it more as a 3D design. So you don't really have to use Godot for this. You could, if you have other 3D applications that you're familiar with, like Blender or Maya, you could design your scenes in other applications. I'm going to use Godot because that's what we have learned so far in the class. So I'm just going to make a simple scene here. I'm going to add a mesh instance. And let's choose, maybe I can make a capsule mesh and make like a little character. So I'm going to throw one of my default materials on here. And I'll click on here. I'll just leave the defaults here. Let's rotate it so it's turning up. Okay, and then, so we want to keep in mind that the center of our AR scene is the center of this scene. So I want to take my mesh instance and raise it up a little bit, like that. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but let's say I wanted to design a little character. I could call this like body of the character, and then I could make a couple arms. So for this arm, I'll make the radius smaller. Oh, I have to, I always do this. How do I have to make it unique? I always forget where this is. So since I duplicated the original one, it's going to change that one if I make changes to this one, but I want to make it unique. And there's a button to do that, but I always forget where it is. Make unique. It's over here. So it's actually on the mesh itself. So I'm going to make the mesh unique, and then I can change the radius and rotate it over and move it over like this. Okay. Then I'll get my arm number 2, click make unique, make this smaller, and then rotate it over. Okay, so now I have a little character that I can display. Scene. I'm going to save it. Go to export, new export scene, save. And now I just want to export this as a file. So I'm going to go to Project, Tools, and Export GLTF. You can call this whatever I want. I'll go with export, new export scene, or I could call this character scene, or whatever you want to call it. Make sure we have GLB selected and click Save. And now we can upload this to Replit. So I'll go back to Replit, click on the upload file, find my character, Oh, it put it as character.gltf.glb. So that doesn't actually really matter all that much, but that's because when I go to tools/export, it assumes I'm making a GLTF. But since I'd already switched this to GLB before, this is like a Godot glitch. Usually it'll switch to GLB when I switch this, but since it was already set GLB, it didn't do it. Anyway, it doesn't actually make a difference as long as the right extension is at the end, which is the .glb. So I'm going to select that and click open and throw this into my scenes folder. And now I'll attach this to the last marker. So I'm just going to copy this line of code and paste and say character scene. Oh, but now I have to write dot. I'll just rename it here because this is really just rename this to character scene.glb. And so I'm going to attach this to the second marker. And so now I should have a new scene. And there is my little character. So a little bit of a glare on this, which is why it's not catching unless I'm like pointing it directly at the camera. But usually working with AR, you're going to be doing something with your phone, at least with markers. So it'd be more like this, where you have. There we go. Might look more like that. Anyway, that's the basic idea. So we can attach different objects to the scene, and then we can have multiple markers, and we can put them in space together, or design or arrange them in space. And yeah, I think that covers everything. Let's go back here for a second and just make sure. Yeah, we talked about the markers. Yeah. So that's everything. I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we can just work on getting all that stuff working.